So what lenses do I use for my street photography? This is probably one of the most asked questions I get on social media. So in today's episode, I'm answering that very question. And I'll be going through my 3 favorite lenses and talking about why I use them, how I use them, and in which settings I go to each specific lens. Also, at the end of the episode, I'm going to be talking about several lenses I'm thinking of buying, maybe to replace some of the lenses I use currently, and also talking about some camera bodies which may or may not be coming out over the next year. But let's get straight into the list. And first up, and it's probably one of my favorite Fujifilm lenses, it's this 35mm f1.4. So I picked up this lens at the start of the year, and it's been the lens I've used most in 2021. In fact, it's hardly left the front of my X Pro 2. So what I like about the 35mm focal range, which is 50mm on full frame, is I'm able to single out my subjects even in busy scenes like in cities, while retaining enough of the background to give my subject some context. When you're using, say, a 16mm or a 23mm in a busy spot, it's really hard to single out your subject. There's so much going on in cities, there's like colors, buildings, people moving, cars coming into frame. So with the 35, I'm able to really specify and pinpoint people more so than I can with the wider angle lenses. Also, with the 35, you don't have to get as close to your subject as you do with a 23 or a 16. And also, the 35 is a pretty versatile lens. You can use it for portraits, product photography, and as I said, street photography as well. So this 35 1.4 is pretty much my go-to. So if I'm in a location like a new city I've never been around before, and I'm only going to take one lens, a prime, it'll be the 35 1.4. And it's the same when I go out in London. If I don't really have a clear idea of what I want, I just stick the 35mm on the front of my X Pro 2 and head out like that. When it's raining, or if there's snow or any kind of crazy weather coming in, then I switch over to the 35 f2. And to be honest, Fujifilm's f2 ranges are absolutely brilliant for street photography. So I'm going to talk about the 23 f2 very shortly, but be it the 35 f2, 50 f2, there's also the 16 2.8, which is in the same family. How fast they are at autofocusing, how light they are, weather resistant, and they're all pretty affordable compared to other prime lenses on Fujifilm and on other camera systems as well. So yeah, when it comes to street, the 35 f1.4 is pretty much always my go-to, and is easily one of my favorite Fujifilm lenses. So next up, we're talking about the Fujifilm 23mm f2. This is the first lens I ever brought on my Fujifilm. I brought it alongside my X Pro 2, and it's probably the most versatile of all the lenses I talk about in this episode. So with a 23, you can shoot obviously street. You can also do architectural photography, lookups, interiors, landscapes, cityscapes. Also, if I'm shooting in a city with lots of high-rise buildings, be it New York, be it Tokyo, then I do prefer using a 23mm or a wider angle lens. And that's simply because it can give your subject more scale, and it allows you to kind of get the city's characteristics in those street shots. So as you can see with these shots here, these are shot with a 23 f2, and by shooting vertically, I'm getting quite a lot of the vertical space in the city, which adds context to the image. Also, if I'm shooting in tight locations, say a busy market space or an alleyway, then again, the 23mm f2 is the better option, as you can get more of the context and more of the surrounding area in your shot, rather than using a 35 or a 50mm. So yeah, the 23 is a lens which pretty much always comes with me when I travel, and I do like using it, especially when it comes to doing more cityscape kind of stuff and capturing more of the city. Another good thing about the 23 is if you're in the city and you're only going to be there for a day, let's say, and you want to do street, but you also want to capture lots of the architecture and cityscapes and things like that, and you only want to bring one lens with you, then the 23mm can be the best option, because you can do all of that in one lens. And this 23mm f2 is so small and pocketable, you can pretty much just pop it in your coat pocket and walk around with it all day. So yeah, this 23 f2, great lens. So third up and finally is this 50mm f2 lens from Fujifilm. It looks like the 23 is part of the same Fujifilm series, and it's one of my favorite lenses. Shooting with a 50mm changes how I do street photography. When I'm out with the 50, I'm focusing more on details. So people's faces, their eyes, their hands, their earrings, their expressions, things like that. For me, the 50mm also works really well in crowded locations. As you can see from the shots up here, these were taken on Shibuya Crossing, which is one of the most crowded crossings in the world. And by using the 50, I'm able to single out characters and interesting events and interesting details rather than getting the classic wide angle shots with the 23 or the 35. Another good thing about the 50, it's really good for portraits. It's also very good for doing product photography and anything like that. So again, it's another versatile lens which I have in my kit, and it's a lens I use both for street photography and also for my professional work as well. So that's the main three lenses I use for my street photography. And while I'm not looking to replace them in the near future, I am keeping my eye out for the new Fujifilm gear coming out over the next few months and the next year. Firstly, there's that 33mm f1.4. So this lens is weather sealed, it's got Fujifilm's new autofocusing system, and it's also going to be good for doing street photography at nighttime. And what that lens will mean is I'll never have to worry about switching between the 35 1.4 to the f2 when it starts raining, or switching from the f2 to the 1.4 when it's lower light or nighttime. I can just get that 33 1.4, stick it on the front of my X Pro 2 and never really have to worry about it. Second up, we've got the 23 f1.4. So this is the updated version of the previous 23 1.4, but it has Fujifilm's newer autofocusing motors and is also weather sealed. So this lens I'm thinking of buying because it will mean I can use the 23 1.4 to do more portrait work and also do more product stuff with it as well. And just having that versatility when it comes to a wide angle lens, to have more control over the depth of field, I think that'd be really good, and it will just allow me to be a bit more creative with my photography. Also, I'm thinking about maybe buying the X100V instead. So rather than using a 23mm lens or buying a new 23mm lens, I just buy the X100V and carry that around as my backup camera and as my 23mm camera. And that will give me a couple different options. Firstly, it's such a small camera you can just stick in your pocket. And secondly, it's the kind of camera where even if I'm not specifically going out to shoot, it's so small and lightweight I can just keep it on me and never have to worry about it. And finally, there's the 56mm f1.2. Now I've loaned in this lens a couple of times for portrait work and for some product work. It is one of my favorite Fujifilm lenses. The only issue with it is the autofocusing is a bit slow for street. It's not terrible, but when you compare it to the 50 f2, there is a bit of lag there. And secondly, it's not weather sealed. So hopefully, as Fujifilm is making Mark II versions of all of their older lenses, in the near future they make a Mark II version of that 56 f1.2 where they're sticking the upgraded autofocus motors and make it weather sealed as well. So they're the three lenses I'm thinking of buying. When it comes to camera bodies, I'm just waiting for the X Pro 4. I said this in like a bunch of episodes already, but I really dislike the screen on the X Pro 3. I'm hoping Fujifilm don't do the same thing with the screen and have a more classic screen like they do on the X-T4 or on the X Pro 2. So that just about wraps it up. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that thumbs up button, and if you haven't already, hit the subscribe as well. That's the three lenses I use most for my street photography. If you have any questions about the lenses or anything street photography or photography related, drop them down below in the comments and I'll make sure to get back to you. A huge thanks for watching this, stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.